Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figured Out cast for April 2018. I'm your host, Adam Koralik. So first of all, just a big shout out to Patreon backers who are getting this nearly a month early. And of course, Patreon backers also get early access to all of my videos over there, usually a few days early. If you want to sign up at any time, much appreciated. It's patreon.com/Adam Koralik. There's a link in the description. If not, totally fine. I appreciate you listening to this publicly. So let's just move on and get into our subjects here. First thing I want to talk about is I have taken a few different trips to Japan for different reasons. But one thing that a couple of things have resulted from that. One, you guys will be seeing various pickups videos from stores and stuff that I got to take advantage of while I was there. So I hope you guys enjoy that. I'm not entirely certain when those will come out, but they will. And of course, Patreon backers will get them early, but they will still come out publicly, of course. But the real reason I'm actually bringing any of this up is I haven't completely decided the details of this yet, but I wanted to make you guys aware that if you're not in Japan, I got to go over to the Dobuita Street area in Yokosuka, which it's funny. It's actually where Shenmue takes place, my favorite game. Now, right now, what's happening over there is that Sega has been doing this thing where they produced a whole bunch of guide maps of the area with Shenmue imagery, and basically you can just go up to like tourist areas and just grab these maps, and so they have Japanese ones and they have English ones. Now it's actually really funny. Over there it's considered like literally garbage. It's just like a flyer thing that, you know, they would just throw away, and they do, like, they have way too many of them. Over here, tons of Shenmue fans are wanting them hardcore. So I really only had a moment to go over, and I was kind of like trying to find one, and eventually I did find a kiosk that had some. And while they had a bunch, I was kind of advised, it's kind of a dick move to just grab like the entire stack, so I didn't do that, but I did grab a few. So long story short, I'm going to be doing a contest to give those away. So stay tuned. There will be at some point a video where I go over details about that, but yeah, I got 3 sets. Where you'll have the English one, the Japanese one, and this other like special just Japanese Dobuita map thing I found. But I'm gonna give those away at some point. I'll come up with something, but that's gonna be a thing. So just keep an eye out for that. So yeah, that's just the first little bit of news there. So moving on to like actual in the news subjects that I found interesting for one reason or another. First thing that kind of caught my eye, because I couldn't believe this was still a thing. You guys know actress and now quasi like complete burnout. I mean, I hate throwing her under the bus like this, but that, like, let's keep it real. What she's doing is something only you would do at that phase. Lindsay Lohan, who I think at one time, if you grew up in the same age range as me, in like the mid-aughts, you were like, yeah, Lindsay Lohan. Like, we all had a crush on her. And now you're like, ugh, what the hell happened? And I feel bad saying that, but it's kind of true. She was suing Rockstar over Grand Theft Auto 5, claiming that they stole her likeness for like the model girl, which was repeatedly disproven in court. In fact, they even brought the model they had hired and everything. Like, it just wasn't based on her. And I thought this case had actually been settled a while ago, but today, at the day I record this, this was actually once again the appeal that she filed again was thrown out by the state of New York. So they have determined, like, and that's where Take-Two, the parent company of Rockstar, is. So that makes sense. So ultimately, she has lost that lawsuit, and it's not really surprising, except that the only surprising aspect of it to me was that she was still doing this, that this was still in court. So I don't know. I kind of hate it when, I mean, this is the kind of bullshit that makes games to an extent more expensive, is you have to deal with like legal teams caring about this kind of shit, and that pisses me off, because, like, come on, man, they didn't steal your likeness. I mean, if they wanted your likeness, they probably would have hired you. You don't seem to be that expensive anymore. I don't know. I don't think that I think this was frivolous, and apparently the legal system agreed with that assessment. So I guess I'm happy that this finally goes away. And obviously Rockstar made more than enough money on Grand Theft Auto 5. Like, that game made infinitely more than they ever really could have predicted, so obviously they'll be fine. But I'm glad she lost, not just for that reason, but also because I don't like the precedent it would have set, where actors could claim this shit more frequently. There would have been a lot more frivolous lawsuits that ultimately the burden of those financial costs, the legal costs, would have eventually shifted to the games, aka us, gamers paying for it. So yeah, I'm glad that this didn't pan out. And I'm curious, first of all, who knew that not only that this was a thing, but that it was still ongoing, and I guess what your reactions are to all that. I'm just curious what other people think. So that's just a short little blurb there about that particular subject. So moving on, we have our third subject here, which is brought to us by Patreon backer Corey Marsh. Now, again, if you want a reason to be over on the Patreon, one of the levels you can do is not only getting early access to videos and all that kind of stuff, but you can actually pick subjects for this podcast. You can even be on the podcast if you really wanted to. There's a whole bunch of stuff over there. But in this case, Corey Marsh, who is OG, he has been around since the beginning of this, and he has not faltered. Every month he has picked a subject. So I always chat with him, usually towards the end of a month, and I'm just like, yeah, man, all right, let's figure it out. What do you want? And then he'll come up with a few ideas, and then eventually we'll settle on one. So in this case, here's what he wanted to talk about: Metal Gear Survivor. And specifically, did Konami just kill the Metal Gear franchise? Now, I have to say this with a big, a warning. I have not actually played Metal Gear Survivor, but I have watched multiple reviews of it. And to be honest, no part of me was particularly surprised by what I was seeing, because a lot of us know, I know I do, that Kojima has left the building. He's no longer working for Konami, and Metal Gear was his baby. It was his franchise. It was, he made that. And there was bad blood between them for reasons that everyone seems to side with Kojima on. But Konami as an entity is definitely a chicken without its head running around right now. And it's really not surprising to me when this was announced and when it came out that this was going to be shit. I wasn't exactly expecting it to go in that like Resident Evil Umbrella Corps type of direction, but that's basically what this is. It's a weird zombie game that has really nothing to do with the franchise it's tangentially connected to. It's done so for one reason and one reason only, which is brand recognition. The attempt here is, on Konami's part, is, look, we got to bring in some cash. What do we have? And they look at their franchises and they go, okay, Metal Gear is still popular. Metal Gear is still big. People will still buy a Metal Gear game. Well, we fucked that up. We can't get Kojima back, and we don't certainly have the talent team to connect to his storyline and really do that. So why don't we just do brand bastardization, basically, where you capitalize on the goodwill of the name for short-term profit, ultimately killing the brand. That's board of director type of thinking. That's not artistic thinking. And unfortunately, that's what they've done with the Metal Gear franchise, in my opinion. From everything I've seen of this like weird zombie survival horror game that really has nothing to do with Metal Gear. You see Solid Snake briefly, but then you get into like weird portals and all this other shit. This to me was just exactly that. It was a game that was mediocre at best, that they threw the Metal Gear brand into for exactly that purpose of just making money off of it. Which, I know the name of the game, not Metal Gear, but the name of the figurative game is to make money. I get it. But there are ways to do that where you can continue to make money off of the brand without destroying it utterly. This is, if you made a quality sequel, which perhaps Konami lacks the talent teams to do that. If you had done that, then you have an ongoing brand. That's how Metal Gear survived. That's how all brands survive. But when you do something that deviates this much, it's hard to say that it could possibly survive. Now, I will say this. I don't think it's killed the Metal Gear franchise in one go. I do think that they will make attempts to use the name. I think you will see Solid Snake pop up in the new Smash Brothers, and I think that you'll see more pachinko machines and shit in Japan with the Metal Gear branding. You'll probably still see cameos of that license in other things. You may even see like re-releases of those games in different various collections or something like that. I don't think the brand itself is dead, or the franchise is dead. I do think, however, that the days of a big Metal Gear Solid game that's competently prepared are probably over. I I do believe, unless Konami goes under, I do believe there will be a Metal Gear Solid 6. Something actually called Metal Gear Solid 6. But I say that in the same exact way we got Resident Evil 6. And it's funny that it happened to be the 6th one, where in both cases the parent company had lost their way and really didn't understand what they had. They just kind of used the brand recognition to make money off him, and they turned, in the case of Resident Evil, they turned it into like more of a aggressive gun game as opposed to like what it was, a survival horror game. The irony here is Konami has a franchise that could have made this work. You could have arguably taken Metal Gear Survivor and called it Silent Hill Survivor. Yes, it still would have been a bad Silent Hill game, but at least it would have been like somewhat thematically accurate. You're surviving in an apocalyptic type of thing, and there's zombies and stuff like that. Like, that would have been more appropriate. But maybe that's exactly the opposite of what they wanted. Maybe they wanted to try and break it. I mean, Konami has made, at best, questionable decisions over the past couple of years. But anyway, the point is, I don't think the Metal Gear franchise is actually dead. But it might as well be, because the irony here, the real irony of all of this, is the post Kojima era Metal Gear games will be like a zombie franchise. And I don't mean like literally they're playing as zombies, although that is what makes this kind of click. Without him, all the games that come out will be undead pieces of shit that happen to have the name on it. They'll be like zombies. They'll be crappy people, if you will, that once were alive and once were great and now are just after one thing and one thing only. And instead of brains, they're after money. And then you just kind of shoot them in the head and let them die. I think that's kind of the future of the Metal Gear franchises. You're probably going to keep getting games that just fucking suck until it completely buries it. Like I said, though, I do think there will be something called Metal Gear Solid 6. But I think I can tell you right now, without it even being a real thing, we'll all hate it. It's going to be bad. It's going to be something like this, where it's just, you go, what the fuck were you thinking? You don't understand the story? Like, it's just a project made by an entirely different team with entirely different aspirations and entirely different understanding of the material. Unless they heal that rift, or Konami's assets are acquired by someone else. I don't know who. If Nintendo, or I mean, I'm just throwing names out there without absolutely no reason to state these other than just desire. If Nintendo or Sony or Capcom or Sega or somebody was somehow able to acquire to acquire Konami, then if you got those brands into one roof, okay, then maybe you start seeing some improvement. But breaking those down individually, which is not really the point of this video, I don't think that Nintendo would have much interest in pursuing Konami, because they haven't had enough interest in going, shall we say, mature. But maybe that would be the way they could do it. But really, Konami is kind of in the same situation Capcom was in a few years ago, where Capcom was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the most valuable thing about them was their IPs. And most people were betting against them, including me. I bet against Konami to survive. I thought that they were going to be acquired. But to their credit, man, they turned around. They pulled it out. They got away from the bad DLC business practices and the weird pachinko machines and all that mobile game crap that almost killed Capcom. They got away from it, and now they're doing pretty well. They're playing it safe. They're doing a lot of re-releases and stuff, but they're playing it safe. They're getting back into the game. But that's different. They wanted to do that. Everything we look at when we look at Konami, it looks like everyone who was ever really invested in Konami as a company really has nothing to do with it anymore. And everyone who has now control of it is almost like the guy who has control of Atari now. It's like, you own the name, yes, and therefore technically you own the assets that come with that, but you're not part of it. You don't have that history. You're not integral to what made it great. You're just bastardizing it. And I don't say that with firsthand knowledge or anything of that being the case, but that's how it seems to be, because it doesn't appear that Konami has any interest in repairing their image or repairing anything. They're just kind of riding the wave of whatever sells in Japan, which we also have to remember from the perspective of being in the West. what we see is like tip of the iceberg of their business operations that are functioning in Japan, and over there they're making money on different things you don't even realize that they're working on. So I don't know. I would kind of hope that somebody over there, because it would be a Japanese company most likely that would acquire them. But that's just all hypothetical. And you really would only do it to acquire their assets. Sony would be my first choice, if you want to know the truth. I think Sony acquiring Konami would be fantastic because they've got a lot of great assets that would really fit well under the PlayStation umbrella. And of course, giving full control, if you will, to Kojima again would be nice over some of his own franchises. Now, granted, Kojima doesn't work for Sony, but he might as well because most of his games are really intended for PlayStation hardware. So that would be kind of interesting, although I don't think Sony's particularly interested in expanding and buying up brands at the moment. But, you know, that might change as they shift away from more and more of their film division and other technology divisions. Maybe they're going to focus entirely on the gaming division. Who knows? That they could do worse things than acquire the assets of Konami, but, you know, do it while you can before the Metal Gear franchise is completely burned and destroyed. That's what I would say. Anyway, thank you very much to Corey for that subject. That was so. Also, of course, always thank you for being a supporter. Much appreciated. So the next subject I have here was something that just kind of floated into my head. There's no news story to this one. It was just something I was just kind of thinking about, which is so when it comes to the console manufacturers and their online services, namely PlayStation Plus, Xbox Live Gold, or in Nintendo's case, kind of the ambiguous "it's coming" thing. Each one of those services has some additional value when you pay for it. Meaning, in the case of PlayStation Plus and Xbox Live Gold, you know, you get the free games. Granted, that's kind of a catch because in the case of PlayStation Plus, all the games you acquire with it are tied to the fact that you are a perpetual PlayStation Plus subscriber. And therefore, once you cease to subscribe, all the games you thought were free aren't really yours. I mean, they're digital. They're not really yours anyway. But they're actually DRM tied to that, and they stop working. Well, Xbox Live Gold essentially does the exact same thing, though it's slightly different in the Xbox 360 games that are half of the subscription are at least DRM free. And Nintendo has said that the same type of service will be coming to the Switch in presumably September, but that may also get delayed because that wouldn't be a first. And that they're going to have aspects of their retro library that will be upgraded, which I actually think is kind of neat. So basically the point of this subject is just kind of, who do you guys think has the best service? Granted, it's kind of hard to talk about Nintendo in that case because theirs hasn't actually launched, so we'll do theirs more in a hypothetical sense. It's just an opinion piece. And to be honest, it may sound like I have a dog in the fight, but I kind of don't. But I will tell you my history with these services. Granted, with the Switch, I don't have one because it doesn't exist yet, so we'll just be hypothetical with that. But with the PlayStation Plus service, to be honest with you, I've never been a persistent subscriber to it. I have never paid for the service, and I've only had it a couple of times as demos or trials. Typically because, it's I'll have to record something online for the purposes of my other channel, so I'll subscribe for 1 month, or I will get, a 2-day trial or whatever, just to fulfill the requirement. Whereas with Xbox Live, I actually do use that service in the sense that I'm subscribed to it, but I also don't pay for it. I've just kind of, every once a year, I'm somehow handed, I'll just put it that way, a code for the to reuse the service. Now, that being the case, understand fully that obviously it would sound like I'm biased because I essentially have used one and not the other, but not really the case. Going into it, when they first announced this, I remember that I kind of thought, I didn't think much of it because PlayStation 3 didn't require to go through a paywall to play online, which was always one of the big appeals to it, whereas Xbox did. And they now both require that. Sony kind of, in my opinion, offered you the better deal because at least the PlayStation 3 you could play online. The Vita, to be honest with you, I don't know. And the PlayStation 4 you can't, but you were getting with that service, and you will still get until early 2019. I believe it's 6 games a month, 2 for PS4, 2 for PS3, and 2 for PS Vita, which, to be honest, is pretty good if you're more into the, I just want to play the games, try them out, run through them. I don't care about owning them. I don't care about collecting them or anything like that. I just want to play it. And to me, they're just digital storage. They're just, data on a hard drive for my entertainment. And once I've ceased to use that, I can delete them. There's a lot of people who, believe it or not, do think that way. And I know a lot of my viewers aren't usually that group, but it is a thing. Whereas the Xbox brand, at least the Xbox 360 stuff, retains the ability to use it after you cease to use the service, but they only offer you 4 games a month as opposed to 6. But Sony will be bringing that down to only 2, I believe, starting next year, because they're going to axe the PS Vita and PS3 support. Whereas the irony is that I think Microsoft will win out with the greater value aspect of that, because of... I don't think that they're going to be shutting down 360 servers anytime soon. I said this last month, where I think that Sony pulling that is another way to start to ease people off of dependency on PlayStation Vita and PlayStation 3, PS3 in particular, because they're probably going to shut down a lot of those servers in like 2020, 2021, maybe if you're lucky. Whereas at least Microsoft, it's part of their package. Like the Xbox brand 360 is now tangentially connected to it through the backwards compatibility program, so it'll probably last longer. So it's kind of, in the end, it's kind of like, well, for a while it looked like Sony was giving you the better deal if you're just about playing the games. But Microsoft, in the end now, at least next year, will probably be giving you the better deal financially speaking. But I have to give the point to Microsoft, at least, that the 360 games aren't completely fucked if you stop subscribing, and I appreciate that. Nintendo, on the other hand, seems to be adopting a slightly different policy. It seems like they're going to go with Sony's basic policy, which is it's all connected to your account, and if you cease to subscribe, you stop getting it. You're going to still get like 2 games a month, but they're going to do it kind of differently. Not only will it be cheaper, it will also basically be, because I thought of the same thing. I thought, well, okay, what they have is this amazing like library of stuff they could release, but as people point out, like a fucking SNES ROM essentially of Super Mario World is not going to entice me to subscribe to the Switch service. And you're right, there's a million ways to play that game, so there's no real reason to do that. So what they're going to do is try and change some of those games, or give you additional content that never existed in the first place, like some Super Nintendo games that will now have online support, stuff like that. So I find that intriguing, and it might work on a case-by-case basis, but if that's the situation, I might be more likely to just want to play those individual games as opposed to subscribing to the service. But let's also get this out of the way too. I am not an online gamer. It's not important to me. It never has been. It never will be. So when I look at these services, you have to understand my perspective is, what am I getting in addition to the whole online gameplay thing? Because that part doesn't matter to me. So to be honest, in most cases, nothing. Because you really don't, ever since Microsoft dropped the paywall for things like Netflix and stuff, it really hasn't been necessary. And as I said, I don't even pay for the Xbox One. I just get it. So it's an interesting standpoint for me, because I basically understand all 3 systems and I don't really want any of them. But I'm curious more for what you guys think. If, to be totally honest, that's kind of why I put this subject out here, is that if you had all 3 of these platforms, let's just say hypothetically you have all 3, and you can only get one of those services, which one are you picking and why? Now, remember, the PlayStation service will lose a lot of value effective next year because of them axing Vita and PS3. That's a factor. Nintendo's is still incredibly vague, and Microsoft's is not exactly, to me anyway, that exciting. It's just it's consistent, but it's not necessarily exciting. And I was hoping that they would add like original Xbox backwards compatibility to that program, but at the moment anyway, there's only 13 games, so I don't know if you'd burn through that in less than half a year. Even if you only gave out 1 game a month for original Xbox, you could go a year, but we'll see. They'll probably expand that program soon too. But yeah, I guess I'm just curious what other people think about that, and in particular with the Switch, does anybody out there want to subscribe to that service? I mean that genuinely, because I don't, but I also know the reason I don't is because I don't really want to play anything online. Even the little bit I have played online with their free version, I was just kind of like, I don't need this. I don't care about this aspect. But that's me. I'm a single player, old school type of gamer. So I don't know. I'm just curious what you guys think. Moving on. Next subject here. So this kind of I found somewhat interesting. About a year ago, maybe it was like a year and a half ago, there were rumors that Vivendi, if you guys, in the gaming world, the only reason you guys might remember them is for a brief time they were working with Universal. They were called Vivendi Universal, and they made a lot of games. And most of them were shit. Vivendi, which I believe is a French company, decided they wanted to get back into video games in the form of a hostile takeover of Ubisoft. But I think we're going to try and buy like 23% of their shares or something. Which doesn't sound like a controlling number, but when you think about how divided big companies are like that and how their shares are spaced out among so many people, having 23% all under one roof means you kind of have majority of control, because getting the other like 70-something percent, 77% in that case, getting that all together to agree on something is likely not going to happen. Anyway, so that was kind of the thing, is where Ubisoft, it looked like they were going to kind of get bastardized by Vivendi. But recently, a Chinese company called Tencent, which apparently is a very silent yet huge player in the gaming industry, came in, bought a bunch of shares of Ubisoft to present exactly that hostile takeover from Vivendi. Vivendi has finally submitted, and they're giving up on that goal. The result of this is basically Ubisoft will remain as is. The current CEO will remain basically exactly in control as things were. Nothing is really going to change. The only thing that's going to happen is that the Ubisoft will be expanding its game programs into China. So there will be more content released there, perhaps even content aimed at China. I know that they already got some weird stuff that we may not even be getting, according to what I read, which was things like HD collections of the Far Cry games for the 7th gen ones. Stuff like that I was like, really? We don't have that, but China's getting okay. So stuff like that. But then again, I have to think it's Ubisoft. You know, if they release it somewhere, they'll release it everywhere eventually. So first, as someone who works with Ubisoft a lot, I think this is great, because while I know people have a lot of issues with them on the development side of things and stuff like that, I gotta tell you, the people who work on their PR teams are like the fucking nicest people, and they do a lot of really cool shit. They're just fun to work with. So I would have hated if someone like Vivendi came in and utterly bastardized that company and just kind of killed them entirely. Kind of the Konami short-term profit logic. I'm just glad that was prevented. In the case of Tencent, though, I have to be honest, I had never heard of them ever until reading about this, which is the whole point. Tencent is, like I said, is a Chinese company, and they're huge in the gaming industry. They actually own massive amounts of various video game companies, including companies like Activision and Ubisoft. And while what's interesting is technically the amount they have invested in all these companies, when you combine it together, makes Tencent actually the biggest video game company in the West. Possibly the world. Yet, have any of you heard of them unless you read about this? Because I hadn't. But it also seems like they're kind of the productive silent partner. Their only aims seem to really be, if you're making money and you're doing well, just bring your games out in China. That's what we want. And that's good. That's a good relationship. So hopefully that stays. I would hate to see them do fuckery like Vivendi was intending on, because that would be unfortunate. But I guess we'll see how that plays out in the long run. But for now, anyway, I'm happy about that. Just because, you know, I just don't want to see another like Konami-like situation where someone comes in and starts changing everything and then fucks it all up. Now, granted, Ubisoft is not historically as beloved as Konami once was. But I gotta say, man, Ubisoft has really been turning themselves around ever since the whole Assassin's Creed... what the hell was it? The Unity. Ever since that event, if you will, they've really tried to turn themselves around as a company, because that really broke their image. Like, prior to that, they weren't particularly well liked, but that really just kind of put them on like EA level. And then ever since, they've been doing a hell of a lot to try and recover that, and this will allow them to continue on that path, to the point where now you get things like Far Cry 5, which is fucking awesome as hell. If you haven't played it, you definitely should. But yeah, so I'm happy about that. So let's move on to the round of shout-outs here. So again, Patreon backers are entitled at a certain level. You're entitled to a shout out. So I'm just going to kind of power through this. Thank you to every single one of these people for being there. Most of these guys have been here for quite some time and they keep sticking around. So I really do appreciate that. We've got Justin Webb, Jonas Pachanka, Rob Janos, Trey Wagner, and Tim Inman. You guys are all awesome. And with the exception, I think I've said this before. Actually, I've met 3 of you: Justin, Rob, and Trey. Trey and I actually hang out from time to time. Jonas and Tim, I don't believe I've ever met, but if I ever do, you guys definitely let me know. That would be cool. But yeah, thank you guys as always for hanging out, or thank you for just subscribing and being part of the whole situation, keeping not only the Patreon podcast and all that going, but keeping the channel going in general, because YouTube and Adpocalypse. So I really appreciate that. Seriously, guys, thank you very much. So thank you again, Justin, Jonas, Rob, Trey, and Tim. So moving on, we're going to deviate now from video games for a bit, though we'll kind of get back to that. I want to talk about, so it hasn't been that long since we all heard the announcement that Disney was going to be acquiring the assets of Fox. Now, to those who only kind of read the headline of that, that hasn't actually happened yet. It's going to take about, I think it's something like a year to 18 months for basically the U.S. government to authorize it, because a merger that big requires legal loopholes to go through, just because they want to make sure that you're not creating a monopoly, because that is illegal. I do believe that will happen. Now, whether or not you think that's a good or a bad thing is highly debatable. I'm not here to really comment on that, although I will comment on one of the positive aspects of it, which is really just the Marvel Cinematic Universe all being under one roof, which is nice, because Disney will reacquire the X-Men and Fantastic Four, which is basically the point of this particular subject. So the kid in me is excited. The adult in me is terrified about how few media options we're going to have in that regard, but that's a whole different story. But basically, so this particular subject pertains to the fact that Fox's X-Men, Dark Phoenix, and their New Mutants movie have both been delayed again. So to give you a little bit of follow-up here, basically there was a movie called X-Men, or just called The New Mutants, that was completely greenlit under the completely Fox-owned Fox era, to extend and continue to use the X-Men brand. Now, believe it or not, that movie was actually supposed to come out this month, at the month this podcast is recorded and released. But it was delayed. Citing, the original screening saying that it was great, were wrong, and there's a new test screening, and they all say it was terrible, and we need to reshoot big chunks of it. Okay, that seemed a little strange, because they did that like 2 months ago. So they delayed a movie that was basically around the corner. In fact, already had marketing materials released for it, including trailers. They decided to postpone. Fine. And then just recently, it got delayed again to well after the time, in theory, Disney would have control of the company. The same goes actually for X-Men Dark Phoenix, which was supposed to be the first of a new X-Men trilogy, which was still in production. It was still filming. It wasn't even completed like New Mutants was. It was also delayed. It was set to come out, I believe, in the fall of this year, and now has been delayed until sometime in 2019. The popular consensus is that while Disney has no actual control of Fox yet, they don't want these X-Men movies to come out because it taints the X-Men brand. See, basically, here's the thing. All the X-Men movies, the Hugh Jackman ones, all those cannot be compatible with the MCU. The Iron Man, Thor, the new Spider-Man, all that stuff. You can't integrate that in. It's two separate universes, and they weren't meant to be compatible. Plus, the Fox X-Men universe, while it has many, many great moments, it also has a lot of duds in it, and basically Disney's goal would be to just kind of let that franchise die and then reboot the X-Men, their own vision, their own way, into the MCU. That makes sense to me. I get why they want to do that. The problem is, you basically need to let people forget the previous universe. It needs to go away. And having two movies come out right before you do that are part of that old universe only creates brand confusion and only kind of makes it so that you're going to have to wait even longer to integrate them into your own universe. So I think that while they had no actual power over there was a lot of pressure to be like, look, you want to keep your jobs once we have control of you? Don't do this. Don't do what you're thinking of doing. Don't release that shit. This is my guess. It probably went something like that. So they keep finding excuses to delay it until it's actually in Disney's control, and then Disney can decide firsthand what they want to do with it. Now, there's all sorts of theories on what Disney might do with it. I think New Mutants has a good chance of coming out as like some sort of like straight to their Disney streaming service, like alternate reality X-Men movie. I think Dark Phoenix is going to be a harder thing to figure out because it is supposed to be the first of a trilogy that will most assuredly never be made. And it's kind of weird that they're still spending money to complete a film that may never even come out. They obviously have no real plan other than just delay it and we'll figure it out later. So that's strange. It's very strange. And there was another one that was in production for a while. It was Gambit, but that was in production forever. But I think that one has been completely axed now because it wasn't any real state of production. Interestingly, Deadpool, which was also part of that old X-Men universe, is the only one going forward because it wasn't so into the X-Men universe that you can't kind of retroactively throw it into the MCU, which seems to be their plan. But from what I understand, they made several changes to Deadpool 2 to make it a tad more compatible with that goal. But Deadpool also has like the weird advantage of being able to essentially jump universes because of the nature of that character's ability to break the fourth wall. So that kind of makes him an exception. So we'll see. I'm also looking forward to that second movie, by the way, but I've also heard a lot of production trouble, a lot of reshoots, but still want to see it, of course. So that's part one of that particular subject. Curious what you guys think about it. This is a separate subject, but it's kind of a part two in a weird way because it's definitely connected, which is the Fantastic Four are coming back to comics. Now I'm not gonna lie. I don't really read comics. I never really have. I love comic book characters, but to read the actual comic is never been my thing. Now, for years, while Fox had control of the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, Marvel, which did not, was trying to find ways to basically get them back. One of their tactics was to try and devalue them as characters so that if Fox was trying to make a Fantastic Four movie and nobody knew who the Fantastic Four were or nobody cared about them, they wouldn't go and support the movie, and then it would be in Fox's best interest to let the brand revert back or try to sell it back, whatever, so that Marvel could get it back. So one of the tactics to devalue things was to essentially stop producing the comics. Now, I don't think they took that same route with the X-Men because the X-Men was just too big, but Fantastic Four, they actually stopped producing Fantastic Four comics. They even killed them off in the comics. They kind of stopped producing toys. They stopped putting them in video games. They kind of stopped really addressing them at all, except when contractually required to through their original deal with the Fox contract. But now that Disney is going to acquire Fox's assets, which includes Fantastic Four, and of course that will bring it all back into the House of Mouse through Marvel and everything. They're now proceeding with a new Fantastic Four comic book series, which is kind of ballsy because it definitely implies that Disney is not even remotely worried about this deal failing. It also implies, just like the previous story, that they have more control over the situation, even though from a very technical standpoint, they actually have no control. I actually don't really care about the comic book itself. I'm more fascinated by the fact that it's just a sign that we're definitely going forward with the new Disney universe of Fantastic Four and Fox and X-Men, sorry. And I'm curious to see how it will do, how they will start to, basically reinvigorate the Fantastic Four and how they will eventually integrate them into the MCU. Because one thing I've said before is not so much that people really wanted a solid Fantastic Four movie. I'm sure people do. But the most valuable part of the Fantastic Four was actually their villains. Dr. Doom and Galactus especially very useful. Galactus could be a very, very useful villain in the next round of Marvel movies, like after Thanos and all that stuff is done and you need to build up to the next big villain. Galactus is perfect for that, and he was tangentially connected to the Fantastic Four. Now he isn't. They're going to be back into Disney's hands. So I think this is just a sign of all that to come. And like I said when I started talking about the X-Men, the child in me is happy about all this because it means all my favorite little toys get to play together. But the adult in me is still like, God damn, like this is kind of amazing to throw all this stuff into one roof. But that's just kind of an addition there. So now I'm going to move into my final subject, which is also kind of an interesting one for when you think about all the stuff we just talked about. I went and I saw Ready Player One. Now I have a whole host of thoughts on Ready Player One. The first one, just because it's connected to what we just said, that I found interesting was that, all right, be aware, I'm going to openly talk about this movie, spoilers and everything. So if you didn't see it and you still want to, go see it and then listen to this. But yeah, the first thing that I really noticed about this movie, in my mind, after it was over, if you will, the first thing that kind of hit me was that there were no Disney references or characters in the entire thing, that at least that I saw, with one exception, which is the Millennium Falcon was mentioned once. But to have, like, you know, there wasn't a scene with like Luke Skywalker running around. There wasn't any, you know, Star Wars like figures or characters or toys or none of that shit. There really were no Star Wars references or any other, like, there was no Marvel references really. And what that tells me is, while I know this is a Warner Brothers movie, they had multiple agreements to use entities like Back to the Future, the Time Machine DeLorean, very heavily prominently featured in this movie. It's even on the fucking poster. Is not owned by Warner Brothers. It is owned by Universal Studios. And there's various characters from various companies that are in this movie. Now, the reason that was possible, in my opinion, not only is that part of the book, it was made possible by virtue of the fact that Steven Spielberg was not only the director, he was also the producer. He was the one guy in Hollywood with enough clout to go to any studio and say, look, I'm making this movie for Warner Brothers, but I want to use the Time Machine DeLorean from Back to the Future, Universal Studios, and you're going to let me do it. Now, in part because he was the producer of that actual movie, and Universal owes him to the end of time, but also just because he's literally Steven Spielberg. This is not the first time he's done this. Like with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, he was the producer of that movie. And according to Robert Zemeckis, who directed that movie was only possible because Steven Spielberg was the one guy who could convince, at the time, Warner Brothers and Disney to work together to share all these characters in the same movie. Which is ironic, because that's exactly my point. When I get to Ready Player One, I think he tried to pull the rabbit out of that hat. Roger Rabbit didn't even... Sorry, that was not intended. He tried, yeah, fuck it. He tried to pull that Roger Rabbit out of that hat again, and he couldn't do it because Disney wouldn't cooperate. Because you think about it, if Disney, I mean, there's no reason there wouldn't be a ton of Star Wars references in that movie. If George Lucas, aka Steven Spielberg's former best friend, well, they're probably still really good friends, but when George Lucas owned Star Wars, you could put Star Wars in anything, and especially Spielberg productions. So the idea that you didn't see Star Wars references in this is just baffling to me. And it's because George doesn't have that power. Disney does. And I just think that Disney was probably like the one big studio who was like, you know what? We really don't want any of our characters associated with this for whatever reason. That's the thing. I don't know what their reason was. Maybe it's because Spielberg has almost never really worked with Disney. I mean, he helped them produce Who Framed Roger Rabbit, of course. And then the only thing I'm aware of that he ever directed for them was BFG, the Big Fucking Giant, or whatever the hell that movie was called, which didn't do very well. And maybe they just don't really care. Maybe the Steven Spielberg name has no clout over there. But then again, he's going to do Indiana Jones 5, which I'm pretty sure is now Disney. So I don't know. Unless you include the Raiders of the Lost Ark poster, which you do see in the movie, which at one time was Paramount, but I now believe technically is a Disney entity. But he also literally directed that film. Unless you count that, I don't think there were really any other Disney references, which is strange to me because it would have been the perfect scenario, especially in all those battle scenes, to have like the Hulk or have Thor running around, have any of the Marvel characters really, any of the Pixar random characters show up. That'd be kind of interesting. Star Wars characters, but it was one aspect of that actually, to be honest, really took me out of the film because I just couldn't get over the fact that those weren't there when a lot of them are very heavily prominent in the book, which is unfortunately brings me to the next point of this. How did I like it as an actual film? I, if you will, made the mistake of reading the book first. Now, I really liked that book, like a lot. And when I first heard they were making this movie, I was like, damn, like, how are you going to do that? Like, minimum, that's like a 16-hour story. To get it down to like 2 hours is ambitious. Now, I get it. This is a common problem when turning books into movies. This happens. But I still thought, like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm thinking, like, minimum, you need a trilogy here. And even then, it'd be a pretty abridged trilogy, but you would need that. Or when I was sitting there in the theater watching it, I thought this would have really worked a lot better as a miniseries as opposed to, maybe like a 10 episode, each episode's an hour long type of miniseries. But as a single film, I don't really feel like it worked. Now, I say that again because I read the book. If I hadn't, maybe I'd have been totally into this. I don't know. But having read it, I just kept looking at it like, dude, you just fucking jumped right over all of that. I'll give you a perfect example for those who have not read the book but have seen the movie. So in the movie, it starts out and they're like, all right, we got to do this race because this is how you get the first key. In the book, they have no idea where the first key is. They have no clue. They don't know what the first tournament or game, if you will. They have no idea where it is. It's 5 years go by and still nobody has a clue. There is one literal clue. Someone figured out a little puzzle, like a rhyme or some sort of limerick that would give you some sort of evidence of where the first one was, but nobody knew what it was or what it was in reference to, so they just kind of gave up. Like, nobody could figure out where to go. And eventually our main character, Parzival, is the first person to figure that out, along with Artemis. The two of them figure that out, and they meet in that context. They don't know each other, but it's a very different story. And then the whole thing about Artemis being like, some sort of like rebel leader, and then she gets kidnapped and brought to that center. None of that is in the book. In the book, they basically, after they have that dance scene where they end up kind of hating each other temporarily, they don't speak for like years, or at least for a long time. And he eventually, they think he's dead after the whole explosion in the stacks, and he goes underground. Like, he's hiding for a long time, until he eventually kind of reconnects, and he's got a ton of money, and he gets like a special apartment, and eventually his plan is to like go into IOI himself and get a whole bunch of information, and like it's very, very different. Yeah, and I gotta say, I really, in most respects, liked the book better, and I hate being one of those guys who says that, but the truth is, it's just kind of how I feel. Like, I feel like, and the book had a lot more room to breathe, so I get that. Though I will say, the movie did one thing I absolutely fucking loved infinitely more than the book, which is the whole sequence with The Shining. Now, in the movie, they realize, I think it's the second gate, that they have to basically go into like an interactive movie. Now, the book elaborates a lot more on how that works, what it is, and all that stuff. But the movie they chose is completely different. In the movie, in the actual Ready Player One movie, they chose The Shining, which was fucking awesome. Because in the book, they chose War Games, the Matthew Broderick movie. And I was like, this is much less interesting than doing The Shining. The Shining was infinitely fucking better. And seeing that all play out was really, really cool. I really liked that. I love seeing the Time Machine. DeLorean gets so many references, though it almost got too many for my taste. And I'm a giant Back to the Future fan. Interestingly, I noticed they modified it so that it actually doesn't say DMC on it, DeLorean Motor Company. It's replaced with like a LED on the front of the car, so it doesn't actually show the logo, which is kind of interesting. Probably some sort of legal reason for that. But the whole sequence where there's a giant race at the beginning, it really kind of, it was visually interesting to watch, but it really does not work as well as the actual book, which is annoying to me because, again, it's featuring the Time Machine DeLorean, and it should be so fucking cool, and it's featuring King Kong and, the T-Rex from Jurassic Park, which was also a Spielberg movie. I didn't like that they, first of all, knew that was the first puzzle. I didn't like that in all that time, every single day, everyone tries this, and they never figured it out. They never figured out, I'll just go backwards. As my buddy was telling me, he's like, dude, even my son, who's like 5, this is my friend is telling me this, he's like, we play video games all the time, racing games. I can't tell you how many times he just fucked up and went backwards in the game, in whatever we're playing. The idea that nobody ever thought to do that is kind of astonishing, especially because the clue isn't even that well hidden. He's like, everyone searched this entire library looking for clues. Everybody's watched this clip. He straight up says what you got to do. And yet Parzival's the only one to figure it out. In the book, it's way more cryptic. And then they go into the Tomb of Horrors, which is a D&D game, and then they play Joust, and it's much better storytelling. But they did it for the movie, and I get why. It's a massive time save, and it starts the movie off with an action beat. Books and movies work differently. I get that. But objectively, looking back on it as just a story that's ultimately told, I just got more out of the book. Now, the book also had the advantage that it didn't have to care about licensing because it's just talking about characters, it's not showing them, and you can use your imagination. So we could get away with all sorts of extra characters and things being in there that couldn't really be in the movie, much like all the Disney ones. But it's just, there's so many things explained in the book that are not explained in the movie, just, again, for time constraints. Trust me, when I say I get that, I did cut down those Back to the Future and Jurassic Park movies out of games. I get how you have to cut out certain content and bridge things just to get stuff going and make it function. I understand all that. But it's still, objectively, I'm just saying, I enjoyed the book's story crafting better for that reason. Certain things that were massive time saves, like the quarter thing, like the robot just kind of gives him the quarter. In the book, there's like a whole chapter dedicated to how he finds that, thinking it's something completely different. The whole thing about, why Sorrento had Mechagodzilla at the end, that's a big deal in the book, because once you've unlocked the third gate, or you get access to the third gate, you get to pick a robot from fictional history, and Sorrento was the first one to ever do that, so he got Mechagodzilla. He got like the best one, and by the time that Parzival was there, a lot of the best ones had been taken. The Time Machine DeLorean is also another fucked up one, because he in the movie, he just has it at the beginning, and he's admittedly poor. Like, he's only doing the race to pick up coin from broken down other players. That's the whole reason he's doing it, right? Yet, if that's the case, how does he afford that? It should be a really cheap item, if that's the logic, right? Yet no one else has one. In the book, there's a reason, because it's unbelievably expensive. It's kind of a one-of-a-kind thing, the Time Machine DeLorean. He's like the only one who has it, because no one could afford it until he could, because he's beaten enough of the gates that he's just like the richest person in the Oasis now. So he has that, and it's just, that's an investment he gets way later in the book. But the poor version of him just has it at the beginning of the movie, and I get why they did that, because everyone wanted to see it. I understand that. So I don't know. In the end, Ready Player One is a fine movie. It's a fine, entertaining, nostalgic experience. I might actually say go into it having never read the book, because the book will kind of ruin it for you. And again, that's a common thing that people say. This is unique for me because I very rarely have ever read the book prior to seeing a movie. So, and I think the last time I did that was like the first Harry Potter, and that was so long ago that I was more excited that they even had a movie. But as an adult, yeah, Ready Player One, the movie was good, but the book is better. That's basically what I would boil it down to. But yeah, that's all I really have to say. And I could say I can see why they wouldn't commit to a trilogy. That would have made a better story. It would have worked better. But I could see why Warner Brothers wouldn't be willing to bank on a trilogy without having any basis that it's actually going to financially pay off. So they just did the abridged movie, which it is what it is. Because, I mean, there's a history of movies trying that and it failing. Like, there's the Percy Jackson thing kind of tried to do that. And then there was the Chronicles of Narnia kept trying to do that, where they had a massive belief that they were going to make tons of money. So they wrote them and constructed them as if they're going to be sagas with no understanding that they may or may not, be successful. And it failed. So I could see why an untested franchise like Ready Player One, which is not a franchise now, why they wouldn't just say, all right, yeah, we'll definitely commit to a trilogy, because if that first one tanked or whatever, So yeah, I guess that's my final thoughts on that. So ultimately, I hope you guys go out and see it and you enjoy it. I want to thank you guys for listening to the podcast as always. Again, thank you to everyone who supports the podcast and Patreon. Of course, the special shout outs to Justin, Jonas, Rob, Trey, Tim, and of course, Corey. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you all later.